Let's see. Uh, Lou, are you there?
Hi.
Hey! I'm so excited to see you again. And so, everybody, this is Lou Ashby, and she's famous because her story's in my book. And so, Lou, I'm so grateful to you for showing up and coming and talking to us. Of course, I made a marker where your story was, and now I can't find it. So I was just looking at your story today, and yeah, I've just been sharing with the members in this course how we've been talking about how the progression from like just regular thinking goes down and down and down and down, you know, like as we get more and more involved in our anxious thinking. So I was wondering if you could start off by just, do you want to just give like us a recap of your story and just tell us what your experience was like, what happened? That would be fantastic if you could do that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and thank you for inviting me, Hannah. And it's lovely to see you again after all this time.
Yeah, yeah.
It's lovely to see the sea of faces. Lovely to meet you all. And yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to share this information with as many people as possible. And it's great that Hannah's written the book Beyond Diagnosis and has created this course. Because the sooner this information gets out there, the more people can be helped by this. It is an evolution and a paradigm shift in psychology, and it is huge, and it has transformed my life. There's no other way to explain it. And so I had what I used to call anxiety for over 35 years. It was uh, it profoundly affected my life. It affected my relationships. It affected my internal world. Obviously, it was a very challenging emotional experience. It affected my work, and I had a very small world for all of that time because the anxiety prevented me from doing so much, so much stuff with my life. So and a doctor diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder, um, which, by the way, I now no longer believe exists. Um, um, it's a complete misunderstanding about how the mind works. Um, I I tried everything in an attempt to alleviate myself of this thing that I called anxiety, this what was quite an intense sensation in my body. I used to get really constricted chest, really tight knot in my stomach. I had shallow breathing for decades. I wasn't getting a full breath the whole time. It was really quite physical. Like, a lot of people who have what we call anxiety suffer with. And I tried meditation, medication, EMDR, matrix re-imprinting, nutrition, exercise, talking therapy, CBT, you name it. I tried it over the 35 years, and the anxiety always came back. And nothing that the doctors told me would work worked. And I'd literally reached the stage in my life where I had resigned myself to the fact that I would have anxiety for the rest of my life, and I was managing it as best I could with meditation and exercise and nutrition. But it was exhausting. It was really exhausting. And I was, trying to change my thoughts all the time. And then in 2021, I came across this incredible understanding of how the mind actually works. That I'd never heard of before, and I couldn't believe I'd not come across this before, which is a common theme in what a lot of people will say when they come across this. Why has nobody ever told me this before? And I came across this understanding by listening to a podcast by somebody who was kind of in this field. And after listening to a few conversations, the anxiety that I'd had most mornings that I can remember for the last several decades just disappeared without me having to do anything. no practices, nothing, no theory, nothing to do. It just disappeared. I woke up one morning, it just wasn't there. And then after listening to a few more conversations, the anxiety that it felt like I'd had every day of my life during the day just disappeared as well. And for a period when that happened, I couldn't quite believe it at first, but I initially walked around in what I still call my little 3-week long pink fluffy cloud period, because I had no negative thoughts, I had no anxiety. I felt such a deep sense of peace that I never felt before. Everything felt vibrant and new. I felt like a newborn. And it was kind of like a peek behind the curtain of what our experience of life should be like if we don't identify with thought and think that thought is us and believe every thought that arises in our consciousness. And yeah, and as I said at the beginning of the call, I no longer believe that generalized anxiety disorder exists. You know, this is a diagnosis that the medical community has created to, you know, in order to place patients within a diagnostic parameter so that they can treat them with usually talking therapy or with medication. Neither of which, in my experience, works, at least not for very long. Or if medication does work, you have other side effects. So, yeah, and as an aside, and by no means a small aside, and I know that we're talking about generalized anxiety on this call, but following the 3 days that it took me to read Hannah's book, Painless, 4 years of chronic back pain disappeared. And it hasn't been back since. Thank you, Hannah, for writing that book. Yeah, what can I say? My life is completely transformed. I no longer struggle with back pain. I feel peace every day of my life. And that doesn't mean that I don't sometimes have a sensation flowing through my experience that I could label as anxiety, but I no longer do. It sometimes comes back, but I don't have anything on it anymore. I'm not fearful of it anymore. And because I understand what it is, and actually that sensation flowing through my system is there to tell me that I'm caught up in thoughts that just aren't true. Mm-hmm. So it's a helpful sensation that's flowing through my system. And who knew that anxiety was helpful? Nobody ever told me that before. And nobody told me that I wasn't broken. So, you know, we can have sensations flowing through our experience of life that tend to flow through our body. And our mind puts labels on those sensations because it combines those sensations with memory, which is thought. And memory is thought that is an interpretation of something that happened in the past that the mind has created. So we have something that happens that we think makes us feel anxious. A sensation flows through our system that feels uncomfortable. It has to feel uncomfortable in order to gain our attention. And because we've been told by traditional psychology that if we feel bad or if we feel something that's wrong in our system, we have to fix it, we think that that sensation needs to be gotten rid of. We think that that sensation has to be alleviated from our system and that we have to do something to get rid of it. But when we find out that that sensation is alerting us to the fact that we're caught up in thought that is completely untrue about what's happening. You know, our mind will take in the information from the 5 senses, combine it with memory and create a story. It's 2 + 2 = 5. Because it's just interpretation, it's all thought and interpretation. The mind fills in the gaps, you know, from the information from the five senses, which is incomplete information, and information from memory, which is an interpretation of something that happened in the past. It combines the two, and 2 + 2 = 5. And it's just a story. But when we think those stories are real and that they mean something about our lives, when we think that those stories mean something about us, about who we are as a person, we think we're broken. We think we're broken, and we think we're an anxious person. That's what we're told. And we feel like we're an emotional, oversensitive, unstable person because we're thrown about by these emotions, which are a completely natural part of the human experience. But because we're identifying with those thoughts and we're believing those stories and those thoughts, it's a really uncomfortable experience of life. So yeah, that was kind of what happened.
Wow. You're I can tell how well you're doing because how beautifully you explained that. You know, it's like you can feel, you look amazing. I can just feel your well-being, you know, because like the way you're describing it had so much clarity, you know. So, you know, to be able to look back on, you know, and I was just when I looked at your story in the book earlier today, and you start off by listing all those things that you tried, you know, it was like classic, you know, there was you know, like 10, 15 things. It's amazing, like how, you know, that like one of the I think stages of going through this is like trying to fix it because you know we think we're broken, and you describe that beautifully. So I really appreciate that. Of anybody listening, if you have any questions you want to ask Lou, I think this is probably a good time.
You would think so, wouldn't you, right? You would think so. And yet I was at the end of my tether, and I really was quite closed at the time. I was exhausted. I didn't believe anything would work but there's always one more thing, isn't there? There's always one more thing to try. And the lovely thing about this understanding is that there is nothing to do, there's nothing to practice, there's nothing to change. It's just listening to a conversation about how the mind works. So that's not hard work, is it? So to listen to a few conversations, and I think it was about 8 podcast episodes where things started to change. It doesn't really matter how close you are. When you hear the truth, you hear the truth. And that there is nothing that can change that, you know. And when we hear the truth, we know that it's the truth deep down. You recognize that instantly, and you start having insights, and you don't just have those insights on an intellectual level. When those insights drop down onto, you know, into a knowing level, you know, and because there's nothing to do, it's not hard work. It's just listening to a few conversations, which sounds, you know, incredible and quite unbelievable even, but I speak the truth. And we all know, I think the wonderful thing about this information, or this understanding of how the mind works, is that we all really know it already on a deep level. So when you hear it, it's like it's a remembering. It's not new information really, and yet it is, because we start having insights on a deeper level about it. But because we're so caught up in our thoughts all the time and in this kind of human realm, caught up in our heads all the time, we're kind of living within a matrix. I need to go back and watch that film, because it really is how we're living in it, because we're so caught up in that world of illusion all the time. When we sink down below that and hear the actual truth of what the human experience really is and really should be, it's, yeah, there's really no hard work there. And so you don't even need to be open. And that's a really good question. So thank you for asking that, Sheila.
Yeah, thank you. I think Hazel had a question.
Yeah, I mean, it was from all angles, really. I was told that by my parents, by my educators, by my friends, by my peer group, and by my doctor. And of course, when you hear that from your doctor, you take that to be the truth, because there's great respect for the medical community. And, you know, I still have great respect for the medical community. They are innocently mislabeling, misdiagnosing, mislabeling. It's the only information that people have had up until this point, that we have this diagnosis. Definition for it in the dictionary, there's a medical diagnosis, so it's there in black and white, you know, so of course we believe that information. What it means when we first come across this understanding, because we're not hearing it from an intellectual level, in connection with, we're hearing it from our true selves.